Meeting for the Metropolitan Council. It is Wednesday, June 12th, 2019, and I call the meeting to order. First order of business is approval of the agenda. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
Moved.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded approval of the agenda. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is adopted. Approval of minutes. Next order of business is the approval of the minutes from the May 22nd meeting. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
So motion.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Approval of the minutes. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion is adopted. Okay, next, public invitation. Do we know if anyone has signed up? Okay. Invitation to interested persons to address the council on matters not on the agenda. And so there's a sign-up sheet, and we've checked the sign-up sheet, and there isn't anybody on there. This would be on matters not on the agenda. So we are going to move forward at this point. The consent agenda. Next order of business is the consent agenda. I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded approval of the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Motion carries. Okay, next we have the reports of standing committees. We will hear from the CDC, Council Member Lilligren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Council members, the Community Development Committee is bringing 3 items for your consideration today. The first is 2019-118. It is the Scott County 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Scott County is located in the southwestern portion of the Twin Cities metropolitan area. And Scott County has planning authority for 10 of the 11 townships within its borders. Thrive forecasts growth of 18,970 new households in the county through 2040. Thrive MSP 2040 designates the county as 7 different community designations ranging from suburban through rural to even agricultural. The county's plan appropriately guides land at densities and patterns consistent with the council's flexible residential development guidelines and the respective community designations, land use policies. Council staff found that Scott County's 2040 plan confirms 2 regional systems plans, is consistent with council policies with proposed community designation change, and is compatible with the plans of the adjacent and affected jurisdictions. Therefore, Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached advisory comments and review record and take the following actions. First, authorize Scott County to place its 2040 comprehensive plan to effect. Second, amend the county designation map to Thrive MSP 2040 to extend the rural residential community designation to a small area in Newmarket Township. And also to advise the county to implement the advisory comments in the review record for transportation, forecast, land use, and water supply. I've moved the item, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. So it has been, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion on second on item 2019-118. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carried. Your next item?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Council members, the next business item is 2019-126. It's to award $172,000 in Livable Communities Demonstration Account Transit-Oriented Development Pre-Development Grant Funds to support 2 pre-development projects in the Twin Cities. The pre-development grant category is designed to focus on a specific future development or redevelopment project that exemplifies LCA transit-oriented development goals and will provide resources to help lead a project that is not another typical development and one that can be demonstrated or replicated elsewhere in the region. Applications were received from the cities of Hopkins and St. Paul. Each of the projects will add diverse housing options to the project areas and support local artists in their respective communities. Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council award 3 Livable Communities Demonstration Account pre-development grants for $172,000 as listed in the committee report, and that we authorize the Community Development Division Director to execute the grant agreement on behalf of the council.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded.
I'm sorry, before the, I just misread, so it's the 2 grants. I think I said 3, so just to be clear.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Item number 2019-126. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Motion is carried. And your last item?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Council members, this does have 3 grants. So this is 2019-127. It is to award $260,000 in Livable Communities Demonstration Account pre-development grant funds to support 3 pre-development projects in 3 different cities. The pre-development grant category is designed to focus on a specific future development project that exemplifies Livable Communities account goals and will provide resources to help lead to a project that is not another typical development. Applications were received from the cities of Brooklyn Center, Minneapolis, and St. Paul. Each of the 3 projects is proposed to be mixed use and mixed income, adding a variety of housing options as well as businesses. Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the transfer of $10,000 from the Livable Communities Demonstration Account Transit-Oriented Development Pre-Development Program to the Livable Communities Demonstration Account Pre-Development Program. Also award 3 Livable Communities Demonstration Account pre-development grants for $260,000 as listed in the committee report, and authorize the Community Development Division Director to execute the grant agreements on behalf of the council.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Item 2019-127. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carried.
Thank you.
And thank you. And that brings us to Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Business item 2019-125 addresses a request for tunnel rehabilitation. The regulator structure and downstream tunnel were originally constructed in the 1930s to direct flow to the Metropolitan Wastewater Treatment Plant. Changes were made to the regulating mechanism in the 1960s. Planned rehabilitation work includes features to facilitate the transition from permitted combined sewer overflow to sanitary sewer overflow status. In addition, the downstream outlet will be cleaned and rehabilitated, which includes a shallow concrete pipe under Minnehaha Creek, a drop shaft between the creek and Highway 55, and a tunnel within the sandstone layer approximately 65 feet below grade. Total length of rehabilitated pipe is anticipated at 750 feet. Access to the tunnel will be through existing regulator structure, the drop shaft, and a City of Minneapolis-owned access shaft along Nahada Boulevard. 2 additional ventilation shafts are anticipated for worker safety. Daily monitoring of groundwater flow at Coldwater Spring will be conducted throughout the duration of construction to ensure no impacts to Coldwater Springs. Therefore, Madam Chair and members, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize its regional administrator to award and execute a construction contract for project ERS-04 and 1MN344 tunnel rehabilitation, MCES project number 807629, contract number 18P431. Everybody got that? There's going to be a test later on. With Lametti and Sons Incorporated for their low responsive bid of $18,506,300.
There is a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, been moved and seconded. Item number 2019-125. Is there any further discussion? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the minutes, when Councilmember Zarin asked about good faith efforts, I was just wondering why Lametti only has a 2% commitment of minority businesses and 6% for women, and why those numbers are so low.
What was the last part, though?
Why the numbers are so low for the MBE and WBE?
Great question.
Councilmember Lindstrom?
Thank you, council member. I know it's been approved by our equity office, but perhaps Mr. Gordon is available, or the regional administrator could address that.
Mr. Gordon, welcome to the council.
Thank you, Council Chair. And so the question was regards to why the Lameti bid commitments were lower than the stated goals. And it's important to note that the goals stated in the contract are merely goals. When we get the bids, there is a documentation that's supplied by the contractor to our Office of Equal Opportunity. They read through that information, call up suppliers, call up vendors, verify all the information, and in their opinion, Lameti did sufficient amount of work to try to include disadvantaged business enterprises into the bid, but for reasons of either an unavailability of those contractors, the bids will reflect that, and the commitments may be lower than the goal, and or supplies from minority vendors might be unavailable, and so that's reflected in the bid. And it's important to note on all the bids collected, they were all less than the stated goal in the contract,
Thank you.
or the bid, I should say.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And with that, I want to ask if there's discussion. So any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you, Councilmember Lindstrom. Councilmember Ferguson, the Management Committee.
So we have a same week business item 2019-132 SW. It's a master contract for outside appraisal services, contract number 18P383. Federal and state statutes require the acquisition and disposition of council property at market value. The council uses outside appraisal firms and valuation services when council time, staff time does not allow them to meet the requirements and or the property owners are uncomfortable with the council valuations. We strive to make takings fair and equitable to all property owners. Mailings were sent out to all certified general license appraisers in the 7-county metro area. 13 proposals were submitted, and of the 13, 6 are proposed for contracts. The proposed contract amounts are based on the foreseen need by the council and the expertise of the appraisers and firms. There were no goals assigned by the OEO. However, 2 MCUB vendors from the MCUB directory are proposed to be awarded contracts. Accurate and credible valuations at competitive prices aid the council in all aspects of the Thrive vision. Funding is available through the operating budget of each division. The item has been reviewed and approved by the Management Committee. Mr. Chair, I move that the Met Council authorize the Regional Administrator to award and execute 6 master contracts under contract number 18P383.
Thank you. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Item 2019-132 SW. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Motion carries. Okay, thank you. Next, we have Transportation. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, council members, business item number 2019-112 is to authorize award and execution of a construction contract with CS Mccrosson for the Orange Line I-94 Knox Avenue Transitway. On May 2nd, council received 5 bids for construction of the Knox Avenue underpass and associated utilities and roadway work. The low bid was offered by CS Mccrosson in the amount of $24,426,017.51. The CS Mccrosson bid committed to a 17% DBE utilization, exceeding the 15% goal assigned to the project. Procurement staff have determined the low bid to be responsive and responsible. Therefore, Madam Chair, I move that the council authorize the award and execution of construction contract 19P029 with CS Mccrosson in the amount of $24,426,017.51, contingent upon execution of the Orange Line Small Starts Grant for the construction of the Orange Line I-94 Knox Avenue Transitway.
Thank you. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Item 2019-112SW. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. I think that was your next item.
Madam Chair, council members, business item number 2019-140, same week, authorizes a funding agreement with the Dakota County Regional Rail Authority for the Metro Orange Line. The proposed agreement will provide $1.68 million for Orange Line project activities. These funds are committed to the project by Dakota County. The county is expected to approve this agreement on June 19th. Therefore, Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute an interagency agreement with Dakota County Regional Rail Authority for $1,680,000 to fund Metro Orange Line project activities.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded for item 2019-140SW. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. So your last item?
Madam Chair, council members, business item number 2019-141, same week, authorizes an amendment to the funding agreement with Hennepin County's Transit Improvement Board for the Metro Orange Line. The council authorized this agreement to fund Orange Line project activities. Since entering the original agreement, the council has approved amendments to increase the value and extend the term of this agreement. This proposed amendment authorizes the remaining balance of CTIB funding for the Orange Line that Hennepin County assumed in the dissolution of CTIB in 2017. Hennepin County is expected to approve this agreement on June 18th. Therefore, Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute Amendment 4 to Agreement 16I-092 with CTIB, Hennepin County, increasing Hennepin County's participation by an additional $15,421,812 and extending this grant activity period through June 30th, 2020.
There is a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Hearing a motion and second on item 2019-141SW. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion is carried. So thank you. We are on to other business. Next, we have appointments to the advisory committees. As the chair of the Metropolitan Council, I recommend the following appointments to our advisory committees. First, I recommend Chris Fredson as a Metropolitan Council member alternate to the Transportation Advisory Board. Councilmember Barber is our primary representative. We are excited to welcome Councilmember Fredson to this board as an alternate. We know he will be a strong advocate for the region in this role. Second, I recommend Mayor Joe Emerson, Mayor of White Bear Lake, to chair our Livable Communities Advisory Committee. Mayor Joe Emerson has been mayor of White Bear Lake since 2010. Also, she served as president of the Minnesota Mayors Association and has been a board director of the League of Minnesota Cities. She's actually been the president of the Minnesota Cities as well. As a mayor of a city who has received these grants, she understands the impact they can have on both development and increasing the livability of our communities. Third, I recommend Nalima Satade Muene to continue to serve as her role as co-chair on the Equity Advisory Committee. The Equity Advisory Committee has existed since 2015. As an inaugural member, Nalima, she is well suited to lead the work as co-chair. Is there a motion to approve these 3 one-year appointments?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded to approve these appointments. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Lindstrom.
Madam Chair, I've known Mayor Emerson for a long time. In fact, I spoke with her this morning, and as you mentioned, she was the past chair of the board of the LMC, and she's transitioning off that, and she told me this morning that she was looking forward to a little bit of a breather and that you successfully convinced her to take on this new role, and she's excited.
Thank you.
She's
And
going to be wonderful.
I think so too, and it's she just has so much experience, and then I guess they're involved in a German environmental exchange, and so she's tied up there today. She actually wanted to be here, so thanks for the great comments about her. Anybody else? Of course, we're excited about Councilmember Fredson, so that goes without saying, we know, and Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Then I just also wanted to put in a good word for Nelima and say thank you, Chair, for recognizing her good work in leadership and community as a really good leader in the African community. She knows a lot of folks, and she brings a lot of community support to the work, so thank you for supporting her.
Okay, great. Thank you. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. That's item number 2019-139. And lastly, we have information item presented by Lisa Barajas and Kenny Blumenfeld. Welcome to Lisa and Kenny.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, council members. I'm actually only going to talk for a brief amount of time because Kenny really is the show today. We came to earlier this year to talk about our greenhouse gas emissions work, partly because we wanted you to know about that before you published anything. And it's a little bit out of order. Normally we would start with what's happening in the state, then what are we doing or what have we done at the council, and then what projects do we have coming forward. So we're just a little bit out of order. Today I want to talk about, or we've invited Kenny from their state climatology office to talk about what's happening across the state and in the Twin Cities to really set the stage for what council staff have been working on. And we'll come back to later this summer to tell you more about all the work that our divisions have been doing across this agency in response to and in preparation for climate changes that we've been seeing on the ground. So Kenny is a senior climatologist, Kenny Blumenfeld, with the Minnesota State Climate Office. It has been a great and key partner for us at the council, really helping us as staff think through how we consider climate impacts in this region. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Kenny. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
You guys hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Well, Madam Chair and members of the council, I'm honored to be here. I am a state employee. I work for the Minnesota DNR, State Climatology Office. I am a lifelong resident of the Twin Cities metropolitan area. So you have been serving me my whole life, and I appreciate that. And I like giving back as a public servant myself. So we're going to talk about what's going on with our climate. And I tried, most of us get our information from disparate sources. We get it from the news. We get it from gossip. We get it from our own observations, what people say. And my job is to help get everyone on the same page. And it's difficult even at the state level because a lot of the information that's available nationally or globally isn't necessarily available at the state level. And I tried to drill down even closer to give us a sense of what's going on in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. But a lot of this is also somewhat similar to what we'll see in other parts of the state. But we do have distinct symptoms of our climate and our changing climate in this area. So first, I just want to talk about the difference between climate and climate change. That's an important distinction. How can we tell which is which, or how can we tell what is what? So I often start with just think of an example. Say you know somebody and you suspect that they have become a little bit cranky in the recent years. Okay, they just seem a little angry, a little more bitter and sour. But then you reflect on it and you think, but this friend or family member's always been a little bit that way, right? So now, if you say something to this person and they snap at you, how do you know whether it's the change that you suspect they have undergone recently, or if it's the way that they always were? Well, we have the same issue with our climate, right? On one hand, we have always had a hazardous and variable climate. That's always been true, and that's part of what defines Minnesota. And uh, people have written about it for decades, and Native communities have told stories about it for time immemorial. So it's well known. On the other hand, at the same time, we have changes that are ongoing, that are affecting the climate, and that are in some cases worsening things, and in some cases they're actually making things appear to be a little bit better. So this all kind of gets to the point that the science of climate change is difficult. This doesn't have to be easy. People expect it to be easy. My job is to make it seem kind of simple, but it's not necessarily simple. And it's important to know that even as we look at what's happening in Minnesota, we should understand to really get a sense of, by the way, you're missing a fantastic afternoon out here. Let you know. I've seen the light bouncing off the windows, and I thought, wow, we're in here. But the understanding that we have is based on a foundation of research. And research is a scientific process by which you test out ideas and then you compare it against other ideas and then you submit your new conclusions, if you have any, to your peers. And it's an extensive and exhaustive process. And doing, for example, one research finding might take over a year, maybe even 2 years to go from inception to final publication. And that's just to get at something like, oh, what's happening with precipitation in Minnesota? So we have a large body of research, but there are some things that the research can't tell us. Where our office steps in is where we've got a little more nimbleness because we don't have to publish everything in peer-reviewed journals. So we have the opportunity to help just say, look at data using the highest quality data that we have and answer some of those questions that maybe are lacking. But there is a need for regional research, and we are a bit lacking in it. And my job is to help people understand both what is changing and also what is not changing. When you hear about the changing climate, there are two different sort of fields of the science that you might be hearing about, and it's important to know which is which. One has to do with what's going on right now. That's based on observation. So what's happening now or what's been happening over recent years and decades. That's the climate that we can observe with instruments. But if you want to know what's going to happen, you go into the science of projections, where people have to run extensive, sophisticated numerical models that do 3- and 4-dimensional computations and require supercomputing, essentially. But they're two different parts of the issue, right? We have where we are and then where we think we're going. These are based on two different subsets of the science. And it's important to know when you take in a story, which one you're talking about. Are we talking about something that's already been observed, or are we talking about something that maybe has or hasn't been observed but is expected to be part of our future? The third point is that variability and trends, they coexist peacefully. Now, if you wonder what that means, most people can describe Minnesota's climate pretty easily, right? We get cold, snowy winters, we get warm and generally humid, sometimes wet summers. But on the other hand, you also know that some summers are hotter or cooler than you expect. Some winters are colder, longer, or less cold or less snowy than you expect. And that is the inherent variability. I do this a lot to kind of show we get ups, we get downs. With all of these variables, we get ups and we get downs. And that's just how our climate works. At the same time, we have trends. That's what I'm going to talk about, these statistically significant, scientifically meaningful changes in our climate. And these two things, the trends and the variability, are often used in conversation to kind of prove or disprove one another. Oh, it was a hot summer, so therefore that's proof of global warming, when actually you need more than one hot summer to prove that. But by the same token, you can't take a cold winter, like the one we just had, and say, aha, all you fools who believed in climate change, well, the jig is up because you can't say you've got it anymore. Actually, Neither of those statements are correct. We can have systematic trends in our climate's behavior and variability at the same time. In fact, we must. It's almost a scientific law, and it's a fact of our climate here. But this is a leading source of confusion or uncomfortable conversations around the dinner table. So let's just talk about our two main interrelated trends. One, we're getting wetter. We're seeing more precipitation, more snow, in fact, but especially what people are noticing is that we have more frequent and we have larger extremes, precipitation extremes. This has already been observed. We're especially experiencing it right now in the Twin Cities. There are elements of variability in there, but it's part of a long-term trend. And this is also projected to continue. And when I say it's projected to continue, I mean we do expect to have ups and downs, wet and dry, but that by and large, we expect we're going to wetter places. So that second half of this century should be wetter than the first half, even though we'll probably have some drought between now and then. The second interrelated trend is that it's warm, getting warmer, especially when it's typically coldest, which is at night in the winter, and especially in the winter at night, and especially when we're getting these extreme cold outbreaks. That's what's been taking the hardest hit. This actually has a very strong tie to greenhouse gas physics. It's the strongest connection to the whole background science of climate change anyway. And these are our two main changes. So we get fewer and less common cold extremes. I can actually use this past winter as an example. And in general, the colder times are getting warmer. Some good news, these important trends or important phenomena currently show no trends in Minnesota or in the Twin Cities area. And there's all kind of nuance you need to interpret this. So one, and I'm just talking about the climate. The climate is not currently getting hotter in Minnesota. It's getting warmer, but it's mostly getting warmer because we're lifting up those coldest conditions. We don't have any worsening, by which I mean hotter conditions, of our heat waves. Not yet. So we have not observed more hot days. We have not observed more extreme heat index values. We have not observed even more warm nights. Not even in the Twin Cities. Not yet. The important comma in here is that the models all show that by the middle of this century, we expect we will. And we know that even if the climate hasn't provided us with more hot days, we've provided ourselves with a very vulnerable environment that captures heat and retains heat really, really effectively especially in the urban core. We have a strong urban heat island. So even if we're not getting hotter, we've expanded the conditions that are vulnerable to heat, and then you can throw in the population considerations. Now, all of that is outside of my particular domain expertise, but it's worth pointing out. We're not seeing the climate make things hotter yet, but we do have ways that we can exacerbate hot conditions just by virtue of the environment that we have built. Drought is another hazard that is not worsening, and it makes sense if we're getting wetter, and we're getting wetter kind of hand over hand. We're really year by year getting wetter, and that's probably going to end temporarily for a while at some point. But one of the results is we've had less drought in this decade, and we've had less drought, even right now, there's less drought in the entire United States than we have ever really observed since we've been watching this stuff. We're in a very wet regime. Again, I would caution, don't think that that's all the trend. Some of that is variability driving us to wetter and wetter conditions. And tornadoes and severe convective storms, as bad as they are, and as easy and as much as we definitely want to link those to the changing climate. We can't. Not here, and not really anywhere in the United States. It's very hard to pin what we think of as severe convective storms, tornadoes, hail, straight line winds, to the changing climate. We have other ways that we're more vulnerable to these because, again, our population has expanded. We have more people with inadequate resources to be prepared and get shelter. But the climate is not currently making those worse. And the trend and the projections are a little unclear because there's really kind of a split when we look at what the different models show us. And this is an area where the scientific community is unambiguously unwilling to say one way or the other which way these are going. All right, so let's look at how we're getting warmer and wetter. I hope you've got your brain hats on. This is a two-way graph. So on the x-axis, or going from left to right, we have average temperature around Minnesota. And on the y-axis, going from bottom to top, we have average precipitation around Minnesota. And each dot is just a given year. And it's the combined temperature and precipitation for that given year. And those lines in the middle, those axes in the middle, are the 20th century averages for temperature and precipitation. So you can see around Minnesota, average precipitation was about 26 inches, and average temperature was right around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. That's, average throughout the year. We don't know what year any one of those dots was, but you notice there's a nice symmetrical distribution. They're spaced pretty closely to those axes and in a nice almost circular pattern around those axes. What you can see, though, is if you look at the legend, I've only given you the years 1895 through 1986. And if you want more help interpreting this, then if you look at the upper right quadrant, which I've got my cursor over if you can see that, these would be warm and wet years, and the lower left quadrant would be cool and dry years. And we see an even distribution of those. Now let's look at 1987 through 2018. You no longer see an even distribution around those 20th century averages. In fact, we have really jumped off into that upper right quadrant, the warmer and wetter conditions. 2016 was the combined warmest and wettest year on record in Minnesota. It wasn't the very warmest and it wasn't the very wettest, but no year that wet was also that warm, and vice versa. And you can see that the other years that it beat out for that somewhat dubious distinction, they're all those red squares. They're all from that recent period that began that was 1987 through 2018. And if you want to know why I chose 1986 and 87 as a break point, it's just that when I started using this graph, ending it at 1986 and beginning at 1987 gave me 30 years. It's now 32, but 30 years is a nice climatological minimum. There's no other reason. It's somewhat arbitrary, but you see the trend is pretty clear. In the interest of time, I'm going to not run this animation, but I can tell you it's annual precipitation across Minnesota. And if we were to run it, you would just see that at the beginning of the 20th century, especially in the 20s and 30s, we had drought in Minnesota. So basically, the map turned more red and less blue during that time. As we dried out, we got less precipitation. But especially in the last 3 decades, the map is turning bright blue. And it's doing so from the southeast. So we are essentially importing a wetter climate from the southeast. And we are now in the wettest decade on record in Minnesota. And one of the things that's important for a lot of the audiences that I have to serve information to is to understand how even recent changes vary over space, in addition to over time. So in beginning last decade, the DNR was involved in a lawsuit with White Bear Lake, and we were with the White Bear Lake Homeowners Association because of water levels on the lake. And the DNR had to produce some information about the climate. And one of the things that we were able to show pretty conclusively was that in the period where the water levels dropped, the area in the Twin Cities was undergoing a pretty extreme precipitation deficit. Meanwhile, northwestern Minnesota had too much rain, too much water at the exact same time. Now, since that time, White Bear Lake has come way up. And one of the reasons is because the Twin Cities is in one of the wettest periods it's ever experienced. And over the last 6 years, so from 2013 through 2018, so that's 6 years complete, precipitation deficits are on the order of 25 to 35 inches, or surpluses. So we have about a year's worth of additional precipitation has fallen on the Twin Cities in those last 6 years. And meanwhile, if you look at northwestern Minnesota there, they've gone the opposite direction. They've actually dried out a bit. So what we see here doesn't necessarily explain everything going on in the state. But if we take our annual average precipitation in the Twin Cities and we just look at it decade by decade, you can see what's going on. The 2010s, even if this year we don't get any more rain, we're going to finish as the wettest decade on record. And we're going to get more rain. And so we're going to finish as the wettest decade on record. And with the exception of the 2000s, we've basically been on kind of a stair step upward anyway. And it's really an amplification of a wet trend after the 1930s. And just to put this all in perspective, all right, because we're looking at a difference of about 4 3/4 inches of rain. Now, 4 3/4 inches is what? This much, right? It's hard to imagine how important that is. What's 4 3/4 inches? I mean, well, okay, so if you're just standing on the ground and 4 3/4 inches of water comes up, it's going to get up to your ankles, a little bit above your ankles. Depending on how high your ankles are, I suppose, it'll cover my ankles. Now, if you just go 1 mile to your right and 1 mile ahead of you, so you've got a square mile and you cover it with that 4 3/4 inches of rain, that would actually give you what hydrologists would refer to as 11 million cubic feet or 82 million gallons of additional water per square mile. Over the Twin Cities, what this means is that there's, and I did the 7-county Twin Cities metropolitan area, that's 245 billion gallons of water that are falling onto the Twin Cities in a typical year right now compared to previous decades. It's additional gallons of water. So we've gotten very wet. We've gotten wet like we'd never really seen it before. And when we look at how we're getting wet, it's pretty clear. On the left axis, it corresponds to the blue bars. It's the number of annual. It's the amount of annual precipitation that comes from heavy rain, which we define as just a day getting an inch of precipitation or more. And you can see as you go from left to right that those blue bars are getting taller. So we're getting more of our annual precipitation from these heavy precipitation events. And then that line trace with the dots is showing you that we're also getting a greater proportion of our annual precipitation. So even as annual precipitation has gone up and heavy precipitation has gone up, we're still getting a greater proportion of that increasing annual precipitation from these heavy precipitation events. Now, I got to be careful because in the graph here, it says heavy rain, but we're also talking about winter precipitation, which is usually in the form of snow. We've seen increases in both summer precipitation, which is where we notice it the most immediately because we see sewers overflowing and backing up, and we have damage to infrastructure, and the creeks are running high. But we're also seeing more heavy precipitation in the winter, and that's coming as heavy snowfall events. When we look at, I was asked to do something for Washington County recently, so this was an analysis just for them, but share it with you. You can kind of separate the wet and dry years or the wet and dry periods based on whether they were greater than or less than the 20th century average. And here we're looking at 5-year precipitation totals. And what you see is the most recent period, we're at the greatest of all record right now. We're just ending or currently in the greatest 5-year running precipitation total that we've observed all the way back to when, as far as we can take our records at this level. It's a substantial accomplishment. And we can keep, this is just you're gonna get sick of seeing these graphs, but we could do a census of all of the good weather stations in Minnesota that have 100 years of history. And we just only look at those. They have 39 of them. And we can just count the number of days with 1-inch rainfall at each of those stations and then add them all up. And you can see what happens over time. There's just, the bars get taller and taller. We're getting more of these days with 1-inch precipitation. even though we haven't changed the number of stations or we haven't made it easier to see them. There's just more of these events. And an inch of rain is not a cataclysm, right? It's not a catastrophe. It's like a picnic ruiner. You can't get your softball game in, but it's sort of the beginning of where you start to see runoff. If it's been wet, you see ponding of water. It's kind of where, climatologists and meteorologists take note. They're not going to put out any special warnings or alerts for an inch of rain, but it's where we kind of start really paying attention. But now let's do the same thing with 2 inches of rain, which is more than a picnic ruiner. This is the left graph here. And you see that the bars are getting ever taller, and the annual increase in the frequency of these is up by about 30% over that 100-year period. So we've seen a 30% increase around Minnesota, and especially in southern and eastern Minnesota, of days where you get 2 inches of rain. Now that's a lot of rain. Now you're looking at substantial ponding of water and runoff. Or on the right graph, 3 inches of rain. Look at that. It's a 65% increase over that period. In 4-inch rains at any one place are pretty rare, but in 2016, Minnesota saw more 4-inch daily rainfalls than any other 2 years combined. That would be extraordinary variation, and it stands outside of the trend, but it shows us where, when you combine a wet variation with the trend towards wetter conditions, what you can end up with. And if we then take those same, and I'm sorry, it's 39 stations. It used to be 40, but a couple of them dropped off recently. Look at the heaviest rainfall of the year at these 39 stations. What we see, those circled dots, are just years where we're seeing the heaviest rainfall. It's at a level that we hadn't previously observed. It's over 8 inches. It's not everywhere. This is, 1 out of these 39 stations. And it's not every single year, but we're seeing that some years we see rain now like we had never seen it before. And this is kind of one of the lessons from rainfall, is that it's not coming everywhere all the time every single year. But as it's becoming more common, scenes like this before and after are also becoming more common. Now, I should caution you that these are actually 2 different days. So you don't have to worry about the kids on the soccer field. They got them off just fine. But here's another dramatic before and after from Duluth. These scenes, again, they are becoming more common. It's not that they're happening everywhere. It's not that everyone's going to get an 8-inch rainfall this year. But around Minnesota and in the Twin Cities, these types of scenes are becoming more common. And then that's just what we've observed when we look to the models. They tell us there's more coming. We're not just going to stop where we are, but we could take what you think of as a 98 percentile rainfall now. So an A+ rain, something that would only happen once a year. And by the middle of the century, we'd expect it twice, maybe 3 times, 1 to 2 additional days of 2.5 inch rainfall. That's a big difference. Meanwhile, if we look at how we're warming, it really is mostly in winter. This is just a table of numbers, and before your eyes sort of gloss over, this is the average warming per decade of winter versus summer. And on the left, we go back to 1895, which is as far back as we can push this particular record. And you see that winter was warming at 0.4 of a degree Fahrenheit per decade, and summer was at about 0.13. So winter was warming about 3 times faster than summer. But when you get to 1970, things really changed. And within a few years of 1970, not just in Minnesota, but nationally, continentally, globally, over the oceans, over the land, we saw big temperature increases. This is where the main warming that we're concerned with began. And since that time, summer's warming has remained about the same rate that it had been over the long term. But winter's warming has increased dramatically. Winter's now warming 9, 10 times faster than summer, a lot faster than summer, way faster than summer. That's kind of how I put it formally. And if we want to see how winter is warming, it's really through the minimum temperatures, those low temperatures. So we could start with the overnight lows during winter averaged around Minnesota. And you see an upward trend of about a half a degree Fahrenheit per decade over the long term, meaning our low temperatures during winter are warming at a rate of about a half a degree Fahrenheit per decade. But you really notice that in the last few decades, there are quite a few winters where the low temperatures would have previously been the warmest on record or near the warmest on record. And that purple dot that I circled, you know what that is? That's this last winter. So when everyone says, oh, it was such a cold winter, look at that dot and now look left on the graph and you can actually see how common it is. This is the kind of winter we used to have a lot. Now, granted, in defense of those who might be a little skeptical about what I'm presenting here, this winter was quite warm until we got to the last week in January, and then the bottom fell out. So it's kind of got the deck stacked against it. It can only drop so far. But when we look at the minimum temperatures experienced during that time, we see, for example, the lowest lows of winter. This is out in western Minnesota because they don't have an urban heat island in Milan. Most people think it's Milan, and that just shows it doesn't have an urban heat island if nobody knows how to pronounce the name. But this is a great station that we use. And that red dot that I circled, that's the lowest temperature that was recorded this winter. And just, you can see that it's pretty cold, but it's something that used to be pretty common, and we just haven't seen it in a while. On the top, by the way, that trace is just the average of the 15 coldest days of winter. We are, in both cases, now seeing more warming there than anywhere else in our distribution. The coldest days are not as cold as they used to be, and they have less frequency than they used to have. And another sort of iconic change that's resulting from the warming of winter is that we've lost our ice cover season on our lakes. And some analysis from the DNR Fish and Wildlife Division showed that we've lost an average in the last since 1987. We've lost an average of about 4 days per decade of ice cover. So that's 12 days over 3 decades where there's not ice on the lakes where there used to be. And we also have some combined trends where we get more snow and also more thaws, and that's what this graph shows. So average snowfall has continued to increase even as winter has warmed. But as average snowfall has increased, and one of the reasons it's increased is because winter has warmed. And that allows more water to exist in the atmosphere, and then when a passing weather system comes by, it brings that water out. So the trace here, the orange trace, just shows how many days are entirely above freezing at Milan. But you'd see the same thing in the Twin Cities. It's going through the roof. We have more days that stay above freezing, even in our cold winters, than we used to have. And meanwhile, we're getting more snow. The people who manage hydrology, who manage snowpack, who have to worry about groundwater recharge, are terrified by this because it means that the snowpack isn't all melting at once. This year, what we had this year was actually a bit of an exception recently, where the snowpack did come off and we had that spring flooding. But more frequently, what we've been seeing is that you get a big snow in January, it melts in early February, you get another snow later that month, it melts in early March, and you don't get the big input of water into the water table that you would normally get all at once during the spring thaw. And heavy snow is also increasing. So this is somewhat paradoxical. This shows the number of days with 4 inches of snow. Think of this as the number of days where your school's going to be delayed or canceled. It's increasing. It's not the snowiest it's ever been this decade, but the number of days with 4 inches of snow are as high as we've seen. This last year was insane. We had 8 or 9 such days, and all of it was concentrated between February and April. And we've been seeing a trend. It's not scientifically significant yet, but we've been seeing a trend for late winter to really have teeth and early winter kind of taking a time out. Meanwhile, if we look at our highest temperatures of summer, they don't show any of those upward trends that we're seeing on the other graphs. This is averaged around Minnesota. And look, heat is definitely a hazard, and we will always have it. And we do see strong signs that is going to become worse. It is going to intensify. I'm just saying it hasn't happened yet. And that's merciful because it allows us time to catch up and deal with some of the things that we know are changing. We could look at 2012, which was brutal. It was very hot. And look at how it stacks up historically. We had a lot of days above 90 and even a few days above 100. But historically, there wasn't really anything unusual about 2012. 2018, which I thought was a good hot summer, that's right here on the far right side of this graph. And you can see how not unusual it was just by looking to the left and seeing how common other dots at that height have been. For us to say conclusively that heat is getting worse, we'd have to see some kind of movement outside of the historical ranges. And this is actually something that's been published in the National Climate Assessment. It's pretty well understood that the center of the United States, including the Corn Belt, including our region, we're just not yet getting hotter. Now, again, remember, we have more urban infrastructure and we have more people at risk. And I'm not downplaying that at all. I'm just saying that the actual climate is not currently making things more heat wave prone in our region. And I should also mention, if I had the same job but was working for the state of California, I'd have very different messages. They are seeing more heat. Oregon and Washington are seeing more heat. If I had the same job but was working in India or in parts of Europe, we'd have different messages about heat right now.
Okay, we have some questions. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
You actually just hit on it. I was looking for that. We've been kind of a weird outlier internationally when it comes to the heat story. And so I just was, and it's not just a message, it's the numbers. The numbers are different for us.
Yeah, we are kind of being surrounded.
Yeah.
It's a good point.
Thanks. You were. I just.
Okay.
Was feeling,
anything
I was feeling anxious about it. Say it. You said it. So I'm good.
Okay. I'm glad I covered.
Thank you. Good job.
We have another one.
Glad I covered it.
Councilmember Chambliss.
I can wait until he's finished.
Okay.
The chart on the right is really the one to focus on because this is. I think I've made the case that what we've observed shows no increase in heat. On the right, we see a map that shows additional days over what's currently normal, where we'll be at or above 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, we can't say these are facts. They're just the best models, right? I mean, let's be scientifically honest here. But it's the best we have. And they're guided, they're built on the foundation of science. And so these models, when you take the average of them, they suggest that our region is going to have between 5 and 10 additional days in the summer by the time we get to 2050 or so, where the temperature's 95 or greater. Now, to put that in perspective, that's a doubling or a tripling of our current frequencies. They're just not that it's not that common to hit 95, let alone to hit 95 multiple times or a half dozen times in a summer. And so that kind of thing is going to become, it's quite likely to become more common. We don't know exactly when it'll begin, but almost every model shows this sort of change that happens sometime in the middle of the century, 2040, 2050, maybe it's 2060. Maybe it'll be a little bit sooner, but we don't have good evidence that it will. But at some point, all the warming that we're experiencing, all the warming that's around us too in the summertime, so those hotter areas in other parts of the country, plus the fact that the whole annual temperature is increasing and we're going to start with such warm winters, we're going to start spring and summer at a warmer baseline, that we're not going to be able to escape the summer heat at some point. It's going to be easier to get to 90, 95 degrees. So it's important to keep in mind, and we see the same thing with drought, because we've gotten so wet and because our summers haven't gotten hot yet, we've been able to keep drought at bay. And, we've had much more hardships from too much water over the last few decades than from not enough water. And when we do have hardships from not enough water, I think a lot of times you find it comes down to policy and not climate. The climate's been providing a lot of extra water. This particular graph is just one of many metrics we can use to measure drought. But just think the blue bars pointing up are wet years and the brown bars pointing down are dry years. And if drought were getting worse in Minnesota, you'd see more of those down round bars. The models, when we look to the future, they're a little ambiguous here. It's honestly hard to walk into kind of a drought planning type situation and tell people what to expect. I often just fall back on drought's part of our climate. We've had devastating drought in Minnesota. We will have, the Met Council is going to have to manage devastating droughts at some point. We don't know when the next one will be, but we've got more people now than ever, and we love our water and we love our water resources. And there will be a point where, even as we are having these trends towards wetter conditions, it would be foolish not to include devastating drought, massive drought in our planning. That said, from what the climate and what the models modeling the climate tell us to expect, it's a little ambiguous. We see that what this particular map shows is how many additional days can you tack on to your average longest dry spell of the year. And you could just see from the color scheme in this map, Minnesota doesn't have it as bad as areas to the south. And if you go off the map into Kansas and Oklahoma, they should be raising the flags, the white flags now, because drought's going to be crippling in those areas. And this is tied in part to how much hotter it gets during the summer. So these are the same models that showed more of those 98 percentile rains and more of those 95-degree days too. And when you kind of put the two together, the take home is, all right, so we're going to keep getting more rain, but we're going to start seeing more space between the rain. And in the space between those rain, once it gets hot, then we have the potential for more drought. But we don't know if that's going to make drought much worse. We don't know if it's going to become more frequent. We just know that the science tells us at some point we expect more slightly longer consecutive dry spells during the consecutive dry day runs during the summer. But again, falling back on what we know about our climate, even if we're getting wetter, drought is still part of our climate. Remember, ups and downs. It's just built in. And so even as we are getting warmer, we still get cold sometimes. That's to me, it's so easy to have, when someone says, well, it was cold last week. Well, yeah, we're supposed to get cold. There's no study of climate change that says it's never getting cold again. It just means we're getting warmer faster than we're getting cold. All right.
We have a couple questions, but I think we're just going to wait a minute here, or there's just like 2 slides
I'm
left.
pretty much done.
Yeah.
So just to recap, we've gotten wetter and warmer. The wetness has been driven by more extremes of precipitation, and the warming has been driven by warmer winters. The projections indicate that both of these trends will continue. We can throw in that we also expect more heat, even though we haven't observed that yet. We can expect more heat problems in the decades ahead. The warm and cool and wet and dry variability that we've been discussing this whole time is going to continue. And so, Madam Chair and members of the council, I appreciate you letting me take up your time with this information. I hope it was helpful, and I'm happy to take questions.
We have, it'll be Chambliss, Johnson, Ferguson, Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Blumenfield, thanks so much for your presentation. I consider it a privilege to get such detailed information about our state and also the climate in general. With the projections that you're saying we're expected to have in the middle of the century and the extremes, in terms of the cold and the heat, from the projection standpoint, what does that mean in terms of storms? Are we going to have more storms, hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, or what's?
Yeah. So the trends that I presented were specific to Minnesota, and interestingly, we don't get hurricanes here, but some of our heaviest rain events are actually fed by hurricanes. So you get a hurricane that comes through, especially the Gulf Coast, but some of the ones that even go up Baja California, they end up exporting their moisture into our region. Then if one of those storm systems comes by and picks it up, it's like it gets a shot of steroids or something. Because those are getting stronger, there's actually the potential that not frequently, but occasionally, Minnesota's heaviest rains will be seeded by those kinds of systems. So they'll be getting even heavier. In terms of the number, what we're seeing right now is more days with that heavy precipitation and also greater volumes of precipitation. And that's something that the models indicate should continue. But I want to caution that all that modeling that I shared with you is from the national assessment. There's actually climate modeling that's been done for Minnesota at higher resolution that'll give us more information. But I should also pass on that sort of the super version of that project was not approved by the Minnesota legislature and had been sort of struck out of LCCMR, even though it had been approved by the committee a couple times. And so right now we actually can't answer some of those questions with the sort of confidence that we'd like to, because because the scientists at the University of Minnesota aren't able to perform their research. So I can only say, based on the cruder modeling that I shared with you, we think more days with that heavy precipitation and more precipitation in general. In terms of hurricanes, it's kind of a similar story on the coasts. In general, there's going to be more energy in the ocean, so occasionally bigger and also more frequent storms, but not every year. So you're going to have some years that are off because they have ups and downs. And then again, for tornadoes and hail and the kind of storms that knock trees over onto power lines, we don't know. We should also assume, just like with drought, it's just part of our climate, and we should be prepared for that kind of thing.
So we have 4 more council members with questions so far. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, having been in local government for 20 plus years, there are these things called the 100-year rain and the 500-year rain, and you know, it would be frustrating because we are working on comprehensive plans and we're trying to manage water, surface water, and developments and redevelopments are being approved, and yet it's still, I mean, my question is simply, are those monikers of certain rain events outdated? Are we applying them appropriately when it comes to planning? Because it seems like we're getting 100 and 500-year rains a lot more than 100 and 500 years, and certainly the citizens are very confused by all of that.
Yeah, I mean, and thank you for your question. It's a confusing topic. The 100-year rain, for example, most people don't know that really only relates to the point at which the rainfall occurs. So a 100-year rainfall in Rochester doesn't decrease the probability or increase the probability of having one in Brainerd or Bemidji, or, for example, even, I mean, if it's Cottage Grove and Woodbury, those are pretty close together, so that would be a bit odd. But even Cottage Grove versus Maple Grove, those are two distinct enough areas that we wouldn't see a 100-year rainfall in one area and expect that means there shouldn't be one anytime soon in one of the other areas. All that said, the original standards on which most of our infrastructure was designed were woefully outdated, using resources from the 1960s, which happened to sample a period of the climate that was very dry. They also used statistical techniques that weren't up to current standards. That information was, I wouldn't even say redone, but it was recalculated using better techniques just in this decade is when that was completed. And so the new design values for 100 and 500 year storms they're really good, and right now they're not out of date. What I fear, and I think what a lot of people fear, is they will be. So if you make a road made out of cement, and you can almost say you etch these values into stone, and as our extremes keep getting bigger, they will be outdated. What we can't say, because we don't have the modeling and we just don't have a crystal ball, is we don't know how big a 100-year storm is going to be in 40 years. We just have a sense based on the trends and the models that it's going to be bigger. And so we are seeing, even at individual points, a slightly higher frequency of the 100-year, but it's not even the 100-year storms that are really causing the problems. It's that the 10 and the 20-year storms, because that's the part of the distribution that's really gaining steam. So it's a great question. Again, better information would result from some of that high resolution modeling research that's currently on hold. That's all I can say. And I don't stand to benefit from that research in any way. I'm just a user of it.
So we're going to have Ferguson, Lee, Gonzalez, Lindstrom, Barber. So we'll have Councilmember Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Councilmember Johnson asked my primary question. Just one comment, we should probably be using the data in Greater MSP's marketing elsewhere because we got the summers are staying the same and the winters are getting warmer, which might help our talent attraction piece. So,
That's it. Okay, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is more of an idea, and maybe it's also a question for our ES and Metro Transit staff and for us. But, with this information that we just got, it makes me think of our fiduciary responsibility as a policymaking body. Is there a table where smart folks like you and our Metro Transit staff get together and think about what this means for risk management for us? Does that mean we have to we have 50-year bridges and 80-year pipes. Does that mean we have to use different materials for laying tracks for trains in the future? If they have to withstand more moisture and drier climate? And then these kinds of things from a risk management perspective. I don't know if there's a table that does that, but I think that would be a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to, thank you, and I'm happy to respond to any questions I get over email or on the phone. So if there are engineers or designers or planners who want to talk in depth, I'm also happy to describe the limitations to what we know. Sometimes it frustrates engineers. They like numbers.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Council Member, if I could speak a little bit, I don't want to get ahead of our future presentation that we'll talk about the work that council staff have been doing, but certainly some of that work is around climate vulnerability of our existing regional infrastructure and our assets. We already do asset management and risk management for all of our major systems, but using what we know about climate today and what we can expect going forward, we will be coming back to you to talk about the work that we have done so far and how we're incorporating that into our asset management and risk management protocols.
Thanks, Lisa.
Okay. Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank the speaker for scaring me more.
Oh no, that's
after reading An Inconvenient Truth and Earth on the Balance years ago, I think that your presentation reinforced the message that climate is changing and we need to address that. And a couple of the things that I was thinking is about the effects of change in our practices and the way we do things, because I think that's the way in which we can drive the message to our stakeholders. And Councilmember Lee mentioned the issue of the infrastructure. I was thinking perhaps even more broadly than that. For example, you mentioned that the ice cover on the lakes is decreasing. That might have an impact, I suppose, on the wildlife of the lakes, which might in turn change the way in which our folks, our stakeholders use lakes for recreation. So there's like a downstream effect that is might be 5 or 6 steps down the road that we also need to take into account. One thing that you also mentioned was the issue of increased hurricanes in the Caribbean and in other places in the Gulf of Mexico. I was in Puerto Rico 2 months after Hurricane Maria struck, and not only the destruction was beyond anything that I've seen growing up on the island, but also the downstream effects of that was the loss of over 150,000 inhabitants that moved to the States because of that. So if we are trying to think about all the downstream effects, we need to think not only of infrastructure, but wildlife, population movements, maybe even things that I cannot think of at this point, but that has to be the type of analysis that I believe we need to engage in.
I agree.
Mr. Blumenthal. Okay. Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you were speaking, I was thinking about how does this impact the Metropolitan Council and what we do on a daily basis. And a few things came to mind. First of all, as you mentioned, Councilmember Johnson, our comprehensive plans. And this go around, we had resilience as a suggestion that cities put in their comprehensive plans. It was not a required element, and I think Mr. Blumenfeld made a very compelling argument that the next go around in 8, 9 years, that resiliency and climate vulnerability ought not to be just a suggestion, that cities include that in their comprehensive plans. I think Ms. Barajas can correct me if I'm wrong, but 40 or 50 or so cities have included it so far, but that's probably half or less that have included a strong resiliency component. And you can come up and give me the correct. Yeah, go ahead. And I've got a few more things to add too. Thank you.
I'm Eric Wycheck. I work in local planning assistance, and I work in providing resilience technical assistance to communities and help with their comp planning. And I'm also the project lead on the climate vulnerability assessment, which looked at our council infrastructure and also provides tools to local communities to do that work. This is a little bit apples to oranges, but I know that the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency conducted a survey in 2000 and I think it was 2016 or 15, right before comprehensive plans, and only 14% of Minnesota respondents, which were cities, had any mention of sustainability or resilience in their plans, but that was statewide. That's why I'm saying it's apples to oranges. But with our push for communities to incorporate resilience into their comprehensive plans this cycle, we've seen that nearly 50% of the plans we've reviewed have a resilience plan element, either as a chapter or woven through the plan. So the needle has moved, and that's not just the council. I think what we've heard from cities that they want this. It's a lot of public works staff that are finding that certainly the localized flooding to be a major issue. We've also had grassroots groups and environmental commissions at the city level that are really pushing for this, just given all the changes that they've seen in their community and the impacts on infrastructure and population.
If I could, Madam Chair.
Follow
Thank you. That's great information. And I think all we need to do is show that photo from the city of Duluth with the raging floodwaters and point out that I think there was $100 million of public improvements needed after that, 150 million, something along those lines. So when people talk about the costs of addressing climate resilience, I always think about there's a huge cost to not taking action as well. And then if I could, Madam Chair, the other things I was thinking about when you were speaking as it relates to our work around this table, two things. First of all, surface water monitoring, and you think about those 1-inch rainfalls, and you said that's really where that runoff starts really having an impact. And you probably saw in the Star Tribune, released a report on the worst performing lakes around water quality, the best performing, and I'm sure that runoff is going to have a huge impact on those lakes. Number 3 is inflow and infiltration. We're very proud of the fact that our numbers in the metro area have grown, while the amount of flow into our wastewater treatment plants has remained relatively steady, thanks in large part because of the I&I efforts that we've made. We're not cleaning clean water. But if we have a huge increases in precipitation moving forward, to me, that just says we need to redouble our efforts on making sure that the clean water that's falling from the sky is not getting into our interceptor system. So keep our eyes on the prize of I&I as well. Thank you.
Good, yeah, just along those, Mr. Blumenfeld?
Sorry, may I address that briefly? One, I think you could show a photo from 2016 in Maple Grove, and then it'll hit closer to home. Because there was massive flooding in September of 2016. And I don't know if Hennepin County ended up qualifying for disaster assistance, federal disaster assistance, but it was close. And also from the whole area in June of 2014. We've got some poster children, so to speak, locally. And just, I'd say as long as we would support any initiative that includes the science that shows the trends, but also as long as you remember that same system has to be able to deal with scarcity of water too. I just want to remind us that it's getting wetter right now, and that's what the trend suggests. But we are gonna be deprived at some point too. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. So on that note, I was asked to give a keynote at a League of Women Voters across the metro area, and so I had this question, which really surprised me on this topic, which was, now that the icebergs are melting and the sea levels are rising, and then the person said something like this is going to wipe out part of California and part of New York. Are your plans going to have estimates for the populations that's going to move here after we lose our parts of our coasts? And I was like, wow, I have not thought about that, and I suspect we're not that far out yet. But I thought that was an interesting question, that somebody is actually thinking about that.
Sure. Madam Chair, council members, we start our regional model based on what the national census is telling us and using what national projections are too. So no doubt when we look into the next decade, that might be the case. It's something that we'll keep our eye on. We currently, that hasn't been something we've seen in migration from the nation to that kind of extreme. But that's something that we will be keeping our eye on as we move forward into the next round with the census coming up, and then what those national models look like.
Great, thank you. Next we have Councilmember Barber, then Sterner, then Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I just want to thank you for the presentation. I think it's very well timed, and also definitely attest that we've got some pretty graphic images from the flooding and the rainstorm in 2014, and got some great ones from Shakopee and Blakely Bluffs that I'd happily share with you. I think this is really well timed because this is really happening in our communities right now. So the area of the metro that I represent is Scott and Carver County, so Minnesota River Valley. So to put it in perspective, the last road just opened this week from the spring flooding. That is a profound impact on our infrastructure and the ability of those roads to be maintained. A very, very distinct effect on transportation patterns. It gets to be extraordinarily challenging to get across the Minnesota River when you only have one crossing open. And then the other side of it too is there's already an actual effect directly to people. There was a manufactured home park outside of the city of Jordan that virtually was destroyed by the flooding this year, and that is affordable housing to a community that needs it, that lost it. And so I think it's just really important to realize that these things are happening in our communities right now, and we should continue to look for that and look for solutions and look at how we're going to work it into the discussions with our communities, because they're seeing it and they're feeling the need for help too as to how to guide investment and planning.
Thank you. Okay, and Councilmember Sterner.
All right, thank you very much, Chair. I just had a couple things, and since we're giving a little bit of background, I'm an insurance agent, so like this last winter alone, we had the frozen pipes, broken those 3 really cold days. Then we had ice damming when it warmed up again, and then now we've had water flooding. And so with those extremities, it really causes a lot of dollars. But my question to you is, last report, there was like 50 legislators out of like 201, or roughly 25%, are still not believing in climate changes and that. And is there some education and outreach that goes on, and maybe trying to do some more education on some of the ones that have lack of some of the information that they need in that going on at all?
Mr. Bloomfield.
Thank you. I follow a somewhat passive aggressive model, which is that I only show up when asked. And that keeps me busy. I do 50 or so of these a year. And I have other responsibilities in my position. And then I try and be as frank and also sensitive as possible. But the Minnesota government has been getting on board over, especially this decade, with some of the messaging, but it's taken a while to congeal. And I think that lack of harmony has maybe created some space for confusion and also for misinformation. All I can tell you is we're seeing, I'd worked with Lisa previously in an interagency climate adaptation team that's sort of getting all of the different government entities in Minnesota onto kind of the same page and a common set of strategies. But in terms of force feeding people who are unwilling, I think my experience is that if they're in the room if they're in the room and they happen to be listening, then maybe they kind of perk up. But if they're otherwise not open to it, I could talk until I'm blue in the face and they won't hear it. And so sometimes they need to see something in their own backyard before they start thinking about it.
Okay,
It's a very good question.
thank you.
And Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you. Such an important topic. I forgotten what was the way that we keep things in our institutional knowledge. There was a word that regional administrator memorialize. Thank you. Or if a resolution or a motion to make a resolution is an option. But I really want to reiterate Councilmember Lindstrom's idea around requiring these resilience plans in the next round of comp plans. So I'm asking for a recommendation on what's the best way to make sure we're memorializing, or is it make sense to the group that we make a resolution that will do that?
You know, I'm going to ask staff about that, Ms. Barajas, because I think probably you, like me, has been out there and people have made other suggestions and thinking about we probably won't be here in 10 years, right? So how do things like this work, and how do we make sure they're carried forward?
That's an excellent question. One of the things in this last round of developing Thrive and materials for comprehensive planning that we were doing at the time, so in the mid 2000s of initiating that work, was using the best available data at that time to write the policy we could at that time. And a lot has changed since then. So as we come through and start developing and laying the groundwork for the next round of policy making, so what would be in whatever is Thrive 2050 or whatever it's called then, and the system plans, then the council will decide what are the baselines. And so we'll start doing some of that, or we continue to do some of this work that we'll be talking to you about with our climate vulnerability assessment. But some of this research that is regionally focused on what are we experiencing and building our case and building up our data and making our best available data in our fingertips. So then our policymakers then have all the data they need to make the next policy and to make the case for the way you want to approach comprehensive planning in the next cycle. So you'll see that come to you in a series right now of work that we have in process. I've talked to you about what we've started already with our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. That's data collection that might then inform you then of, do you want to set goals? How does that inform what you do with your operations? How does that inform what we do as a region around planning? And similarly, we'll bring to our climate vulnerability assessment and other work and say, what as a policymaking board do you want to set your direction on? How do we want to move forward? And what additional research should we be doing as staff to help support you in making those decisions going forward? So we build that case going forward and build the data we need to support that work going forward. So we would expect to see that as we move into that of developing options and strategies and approaches, that it starts with the research and then moves into, well, what do we have control over in our operations? What do we have influence over? And then where does that go into those next steps? So I know it's not an easy answer, but it's more of a long-term approach to how we do policy making.
Well, just so to actually make sure it happens, I mean, that's will it be because Councilmember Lindstrom is chair of the committee? I mean, will this happen this year?
Madam Chair, council members, you'll see we'll bring back our climate change work that we have already been doing under direction that's in Thrive today. The things that Thrive tells us to do: assess the vulnerability of our assets and our infrastructure, and then we'll be, presenting that work to us. The greenhouse gas emissions will, as we get that data out, we'll be presenting that work to you then too. And as a policy-making board, then we would look for your direction. And now that you know this, what do you want staff to do with this information? So it's an iterative. It might be go and look at the impact here. It might be, well, we need to change how we address transit in this area. Or it might be all of those things. So I can't promise you an easy policy answer, but I can at least tell you the initial steps that you would take. And at some point you may decide, we can't wait to the next Thrive development. Maybe we need to do an interim climate policy. or something along those lines. So that is a strategy that previous councils have taken in the past of interim policies, and it's something that we can talk about more, but we want to give you the data first so that you can feel comfortable with what strategy and directions you'd like us to take.
Follow up?
I guess what I'm looking for is just that we're committed and we'll specifically have a conversation around adding resilience to the comp plans. Conversation meaning whatever needs to happen, the collection of data, but that it will be something that will be discussed, it will be considered, and it will go forward. So into the decision-making process that is in place. So is the best way to say memorialize this, stamp on it, and then that goes somewhere that people will then see back? Or is it to make a motion that we are asking to have that be the case?
To the RA, what's the best way to do this?
Madam Chair, Council Member, I think Lisa and her staff are really diligent at taking notes on your conversations. Obviously, Liz records it in the minutes, so I think they've clearly heard you today. And given that we have dedicated staff to this, I don't foresee any scenario where we lose that thread and don't come back to you. If you feel you'd like to make a motion on a resolution, I would suggest that we work on that offline so everybody has a printed copy of the resolution in front of them, and we can put that on a future agenda. But I would suggest we're happy to do it. It may not be necessary. Lisa and her staff are on top of that.
I'm happy to do that. Can I work with you, Councilmember Lindstrom?
110%.
Perfect. The last thing I wanted to say on this is that I think Councilmember Gonzalez, I believe, but if I'm putting words in your mouth, correct me, has mentioned this before around our choices around investments and system changes when it comes to what are we doing within the power we have to affect all of the contributors to climate change, not just to be reactionary to the how do we survive it, but that boat has not fully sailed and it can get worse. The part that I feel most accountable to as a stakeholder, we don't talk about a whole lot. And it's going to be hard for me to not be emotional while talking about this, so I apologize. But there are 21 young people who are suing the U.S. government between the ages of 11 and 22 because they think that we're killing their future life. I have a son who's 12. He's 11 until next month. I don't want to give up. And I don't just want to talk about how do we survive or how do we have infrastructure. I also don't want our kids to have to sue us to have a future that they can feel that they're secure in. So I just want to speak about that group, the Juliana versus United States government, let them know that they're seen, and to think about how can we not just make jokes about it being warmer in Minnesota and a nicer place to live? You know, that's often what comes up when we make light of this. But to acknowledge that we have children who believe that they don't have a future, that their planet and their home is not safe. And that's kids in our country who are not feeling the effects of this fully yet, where there are kids in many countries who are losing literally the home underneath their feet due to sea level rise. Or the million species that are going extinct. So I just would encourage us to not just think about what we can do to survive, but what can we do as our institution. We're already doing things I'm super proud about, like the 100% electric buses, like creating better air quality for people who've had horrible air quality in the context of the launch of the Sea Line this weekend. But I just want us to remember that's a stakeholder group who we don't see in front of us regularly here. And we don't often talk about of our own volition. So I just wanted to make sure that I brought them into this space and that we think about what we could do with our investment choices, with our systems choices around making sure we're continuing to do our part and to encourage our communities and lead by example where we can. Thank you.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the passion on this. It's an important topic. And, you know, I just want to emphasize and agree with what's said, but process is very important with the many, many, many communities we have out there that are at various stages of adopting and moving towards resiliency and understanding what we have facing us. And so I think continuing, I really appreciate staff, holding workshops, getting information out there, and the state as well, educating those other stakeholders who are policymakers at all levels of government, especially at our state, but certainly at the local level. So I just want to make sure that we work in concert and are really trying to build partnership in this. And I would also say, as we move towards resiliency, and I agree with you, I don't think all is lost yet, but we've got to start moving. But it's going to require money too. Not all communities have the dollars that it's going to take. It's just like affordable housing. It's an important need, and yet we know we need dollars in those local communities to actually get what we need done. Same thing, and it really is demonstrating that as I&I is a perfect example. We put grants in place so that communities who could never do it except for having the grant are able to opt in and have that impact. So this is going to, certainly be at many levels of government, and I appreciate us putting our stamp on it as well, but trying to really help build that system that will get those local communities to not just put it in a comp plan, but then to be able to execute on it successfully. It's very difficult to execute on enough affordable housing right now. This is massive as well. So that's the mindset around process, education, and bringing along stakeholders as we take steps forward.
Good. Well, very good discussion, council members. Okay. Councilmember Lee and then Fredson.
Okay, sorry, and thank you, Madam Chair. I just have one more point. Thank you to council members Alice Emerson and
Johnson.
Lindstrom, sorry. Councilmember Lindstrom. Related to that, I want to say that when we ask cities and counties to talk about resiliency, that it also has to be a nuanced approach. Newport is in my district, and they are cut onto bluffs, limestone bluffs, hard limestone bluffs, and so their geography is a little different, and so they complain to me more about I&I issues in a different manner than my other communities, and so it also has to be a nuanced approach. So thank you.
Councilmember Fredson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I'm assuming, but I figured I'd at least ask if you've made your presentation to State House and State Senate committees, specifically like Energy and Environment committees.
I have not. I have not made such a presentation, no.
Well, remember he says he only does it by request, so maybe we could figure out how to do that. Hopefully get some people that might want to do that. I was just thinking, so I was in the State House for 14 years, and I was thinking, I haven't really run across you and how fascinating this is, right, and interesting, and we should all know this. So good point. We can talk further about that sometime, about how to make that happen. Mr. Blumenfeld, we'll give you the last words here.
It's been Madam Chair, thank you, and members of the council, thank you for this opportunity to share information. Insofar as you were able to follow me and I didn't put you to sleep, you are now up to date on Minnesota's changing climate. And this presentation is available. I provided it to Eric and Lisa, and it's actually available online. I provided a link because it's too big to share via email, but this is all public information. So thank you so much. I appreciate your attention and your passion, and I do hope you can catch the waning hours of glory today.
Yes, thank you
very much.
Great. Okay, we're going to finish up our meeting. Reports. For the chair, I just want to mention three things. We met with the Dakota County Board yesterday. Councilmember Sterner, Councilmember Lee, Councilmember Fredson, you're all sitting in the same area. We're there. We had a really good discussion. Then we gave a report to the board and then went into a lunch and had a discussion. And, it's our collar counties they want things, right? Just like all of our counties want things. And so it was a good discussion to learn about their needs, what we can do, and trying to continue to be good partners with our counties. I met with our new Chief Inclusion Officer for the state, Chris Taylor, this week, along with Cy Jordan, and we talked about strategies for inclusion and equity. It was great to meet him. He is really interesting and really thoughtful, and so I think he's going to do a good job for us. And then the other thing I was just going to report, we had an unsheltered homeless public officials meeting this week, and so continue to talk about what are the commitments that organizations like the Met Council, like the cities, like the counties are going to make to the unsheltered homeless issues, particularly this summer as the encampments start to turn up. I think you were there, Councilmember Lilligren. I don't know if you have any comment on that.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. And just briefly, and so this is part of the regional unsheltered homelessness design work group. And what was really interesting was the consistency and kind of the strength of all of these this regional leadership looking to craft a regional conversation around this. And so as the regional body, it was kind of interesting sitting in the middle of that conversation. It looks like philanthropy is really going to step into that space and support us in crafting that regional conversation.
So it's exciting to kind of watch it emerge.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's it for me. Council members' reports. I think Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of things. Through the TAP, we are working on a regional solicitation work group that's reevaluating the criteria and all the different factors that go into scoring projects through the regional solicitation process. Councilmember Cummings and I are both serving on that. We're on our third meeting. I think we've had some fantastic discussions. We will continue throughout the summer, but that will inform how some of the regional solicitation funds are being spent, and I'm sure it will come back in some sort of committee of the whole or something to talk about kind of the work that we've done so far. But it's been very, very good. We've got a very a broad-ranging group of people with a lot of different ideas, but it's been very constructive conversation. A couple of other things. Want to thank you for coming out to Carver Crossings. We haven't actually had reports since then. We had a great event with Commissioner Ho out there about housing and affordable housing, and in particular affordable housing in the suburbs, which I thought was really, really a good event. And then also we've been having additional conversations recently with the city of Shakopee, who recently joined the Livable Communities program after stepping back for several years. So I want to thank, I see Paul Burns in the audience. He came out, we've met with city council members, and we're trying to get the communication going out there about what the program is and what it does. Again, kind of working on sort of that affordable housing piece and as it relates to the suburbs.
Okay, thanks. And just on that note, I just wanted to mention, if you don't know this, it's kind of new to us. We meet, the MnDOT and the Met Council meet once a month as well. So there's a lot of learning on transportation on all these issues, right? And the learning curve. So thank you, Councilmember Atlas Ingerson.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say thank you to the past Met Council and Met Council staff that have brought about the Sea Line in North Minneapolis. Not to steal your thunder, but I grew up just off of Penn Avenue in North Minneapolis, and I lived in that area well past that part of my life after I left my childhood home, because it's a wonderful place to live. However, I lived car-free and biked where I wanted to go because, frankly, the bus travel was too slow. Even though I lived by car, less than an 8-minute drive to downtown Minneapolis. It would take 45 minutes to get there on a bus. However, this weekend I rode a 100% electric bus from even further out in North Minneapolis, Lowry and Penn to downtown Minneapolis in 14 minutes. And that is a game changer. It's a game changer for equity, because when you think about, research shows us that people of color, particularly women of color, have much, much longer commutes than everyone else. So you can think of, as a mom, having to spend 2 hours on average in a commute, and what that means, 14 minutes to that life of so many people who really deserve it, because they're taking mass transit all the time and helping our environment. And then to also, on top of that, have them be ones that contribute to great air quality is just phenomenal. So it felt really wonderful to do that personally, but I just am grateful. I feel bad that we're the ones getting our photos taken, because I mean, so I just want to appreciate the council that came before us and did that work, and all of the staff who went into doing that. We don't always have times where we should feel really good about something. We don't always get that, but that's something we should really people should feel really, really good about. And people are excited already. They're talking about it. I was with City Council Vice President Andrea Jenkins at Sammy's on Broadway, and people were talking about it in Sammy's on Broadway 2 days later. So, and they're waiting for the next one. They're already talking about the next one. So, thank you.
Very exciting. Good, good. I'm going to go to Councilmember Lilligren and then Sterner.
Thank you, and Madam Chair and my colleagues, if you'll just indulge me in taking off my Met Council hat for a moment, putting on my community hat, I just want to invite everyone out to Northern Spark Festival this weekend. So it's Friday and Saturday, starts at 9 o'clock, goes till 2 a.m. And there are 3 locations right downtown Minneapolis at the Commons Park, right outside the Viking Stadium, in the Rondo neighborhood, outside Hallie Q. Brown Community Center, and then the American Indian Cultural Corridor as well. And the theme this year is We Are Here, Resilience, Renewal, Regeneration, and it's going to be epic. So please come out.
Great.
I'll be up all night.
Councilmember Sterner.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just was going to fill in, had last week in that, but I worked with the Public Health, Department of Public Health, and they were identifying emergency contaminants in the water. So I met with, and they identified like 10 that they were looking at and come up with a list of 5. So they're looking for input if people are looking for certain contaminants that they feel are more important for their communities or what have you to get back to them. And then I also went to over the weekend to the Minnesota Zoo Beasley Ball, and it was really well attended. Was higher attended, but they actually ended up raising money for children, disadvantaged children, to get into the zoo free. So their goal was $250,000, and the people there raised like $280,000. But then a woman came up there, and her mother died last year, and she matched $300,000. So they actually raised $600,000 for disadvantaged children to get to the zoo free and that then. So I'm kind of looking at kind of connecting the dots of possibly having another stop on the red line, for the zoo, because it is kind of a really asset for the state of Minnesota that's doesn't have adequate transportation. Getting there with our C line opening up and hopefully soon our orange line, it should have some opportunities there. And to segue to that, I was at the groundbreaking on Monday for their, they had full parking when they opened up the red line, and now it's kind of expanding parking and that over at the transit station. So that was on Monday. It was pretty well attended, and I made some good contacts with MVTA, people like Luther, the executive director, and the county commissioners and that. So so it was been a busy week besides what you reported on, Chair, with meeting with the county and that then. So.
Oh, it's really, I'm really hearing a lot of great comments out there, how much you all are out there, how much you're connecting with people, talking to people. It's like, wow, now we know who the Met Council is, because in some of these seats, people have not been out there. And so I really appreciate how much you're out there and how much you're doing. Even when that calendar comes out, it's like, wow, how much. Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, yesterday, actually, I was at Birchwood Village City Council meeting, and one of the City Council commissioners asked me, what's the value of the Met Council for us? Since our small community is all built up, we're not connected to any of your infrastructure. And of course, I was stumped. I didn't know how to answer that. But Annalisa Vang, who was with me, after we left the meeting, she said, well, one phrase that we use among staff is that it takes planning to stay the same. So that got me thinking, and I thought that would have been a great answer to the City Council, that you might not wish to change, but that's actually some of the things that the Met Council can do for you, is make sure that you can remain the same by, accessing our services, etc. So kudos to Annalisa and to staff for coming up with brilliant phrases like that, and keep them coming. Thank you.
Okay, good. Anything else? Councilmember Johnson?
I just want to thank staff and the employees of Met Council for the great information that was put out in honor of the Pride Festival that's coming up in a week and a half. It was really great to see the information that was put out and to see Met Council strongly behind the community and being proud about it. So that was very meaningful for me and my family. And I just want to thank the work that was put into it. It was wonderful to meet some new friends today.
I agree, definitely. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just on it, also the Met Council, Met Transit staff that was in attendance invited us down to march in the parade on Sunday, so they'll be meeting at 9 o'clock at Met Transit Haywood Garage. Thank you.
Yeah, so there you go. Councilmember Fredson?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add on the conversation related to the sea line. I just think it totally embodies like the One Minnesota idea, and it's in addition to the environment and the community, the fact that there are workers, people who live up in and around St. Cloud that build those. They're good paying union jobs that support the economy in central Minnesota, and then it's Metro resources going to support those jobs. So I just think it's a perfect example of the Walls-Flanagan vision.
Great. Good. Anything else? All right. With that, let's see. The regional administrator.
No report.
So she won't report, but now it's her daughter's birthday. She's today, so she goes to bed at 7. I know that.
Yeah.
Is she going to be 3?
She's 2.
2. She's just turning 2, and if you haven't seen her, she's like a little Meredith.
She's a very bossy 2-year-old.
That's good. So happy birthday to Caroline.
Caroline, yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And to legal counsel.
No report.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded.